Good evening, everybody. I'm so happy to welcome you all tonight on behalf of Rollins College and the Cornell Fine Arts Museum. My name is Anna Heller, and I'm the Bruce A. Beal Director of the museum. And I'm very honored to introduce tonight's speaker, whose presence here on campus is made possible by the Thomas P. Johnson Distinguished Visiting Scholar Fund at Rollins. Now, in today's art world, Hank Willis Thomas doesn't really need an introduction, but trying to cram his accomplishments in a few words so I don't take the entire evening is very challenging for me. So, with apologies that I will leave a lot out, let me just say that in the 12 years that have gone by since Hank Willis Thomas obtained his dual graduate degrees in photography and visual criticism from the California College of the Arts, his undergraduate degree being from my alma mater, New York University, go Violets. In the 12 years, he has had no fewer than 44, that is 44 solo exhibitions. And that is solo and two-person exhibition, but that is from the selected exhibitions list. So I'm really not sure what the full exhibition list, and those exhibitions have been in various museums and galleries in this country and abroad, in places from New York City to California, and from the Cleveland Art Museum to the Corcoran Gallery in Washington, D.C., and from Toronto to Paris to South Africa. He has been an artist in residence at places as diverse as the Johns Hopkins University and multiple times at the Cité Internationale des Arts in Paris, France. He has received many fellowships and awards, among which the Dubois Institute Resident Fellowship at Harvard University, the New Media Grant from Tribeca Film Institute, the New Media Infinity Award from the International Center for Photography in New York City, and he was the first recipient of the Aperture West Book Prize, as well as he has been recently appointed to the Public Design Commission of the City of New York, where he lives and works. His collaborative projects have been featured at the Sundance Film Festival and have been installed permanently at places like the Oakland International Airport, the Birmingham International Airport, the Oakland Museum of California, and the University of California at San Francisco. His work is represented in collections of numerous museums: MoMA, the Whitney, the Guggenheim, the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Fine Arts in Houston, the Studio Museum of Harlem, and the list goes on, and of course, very importantly, in the collection of the Cornell Fine Arts Museum at Rollins College. We have 4 works by Hank Willis Thomas in our collection, 2 of which are currently on view at the museum, so please stroll back over tomorrow or in days after and look at them. And 3 of the 4 works that we have are from a very recent body of work from last year, from 2015, entitled Unbranded: A Century of White Women, 1915 to 2015. What I particularly admire about this body of work and what makes examples from this series so enormously fitting for a teaching museum on a college campus is the fact that it shows history in its very messy incarnation that is actually how history happens, not the neat succession that history books try to represent. You know, the 1 step forwards, 2 steps back, connections that are immediately followed by disconnects. And that's really so much the way history really unfolds, and I think that it's such a wonderful conversation starter with our students when we look at those pictures and we put them in the context of not only art history, but in the context of the history that we live in together today. Hank Willis Thomas once wrote, "The people who aren't afraid to use their voices get heard." That goes back to this idea of the power of words. Use your voice, because if you don't, other people will use theirs, and you're going to be listening rather than being a part of the conversation. And it's important to do both. Hank's art in various media is a very powerful voice in today's conversation about art, and he uses it very well. And for sharing it with us tonight and sharing his conversation with us, I want to thank him, and please welcome Hank Willis Thomas.
Did anybody else fall asleep during that one? It's really, really great to be here in Central Florida on such a warm and kind of cloudy but sunny by New York standards day. And I thank you, Amy, and to Barbara Alfon for being hugely responsible for bringing me and my work here. And thank you all for coming. And I'm just curious, how many people here are students at Rollins? Oh, that's kind of a majority. And how many people here teach here? Teach in the region. Thank you. And how many people live here all the time? How many people live here some of the time? And how many people went to Rollins but have graduated? So I think I'm just curious, you know, you're looking at a huge, diverse group of people, and you're curious how many things they have in common and what brings them all to one place at the same time. I think about a lot of different things all the time, like all of us, but I think about equality and diversity in numerous ways. And I think my work, like many other people's work, is really just a way of figuring out my place in the world. And one of the projects I did last year, or 2 years ago, was, can we dim this light a little bit? I'm sorry. One of the projects I did 2 years ago, was about James Baldwin, a writer and activist in the 60s, well, from the 1940s till now, even though he's been long dead. And what I was doing was looking at his text and his speeches and how they kind of spoke to contemporary issues. And so I want to start off with a little excerpt from that 5-channel video installation.
It seems to me
Does the volume go higher?
It seems to me
Thank you.
that the artist struggle for his integrity must be considered as a metaphor for the struggle which is universal and daily of all human beings on the face of this terrifying globe to get to become human beings. What we might get at this evening, if we are lucky, if the mic doesn't fail, my voice holds out, if you ask me questions, is what the importance of this effort is.
Now, when you were starting out as a writer, you were a black, impoverished homosexual. You must have said to yourself, gee, how disadvantaged can I get?
Oh, no, I thought I hit the jackpot.
Oh, great.
It was so outrageous you could not go any further, you know. So you had to find a way to use it.
James Baldwin, who are you?
First of all, I'm speaking as an American citizen. I'm speaking also as the grandson of a slave.
My mother was born in Maryland. My father was born in New Orleans. I was born in New York.
Someone who represents a very complex country which insists on being simple-minded.
If I were originally from Dakar or from wherever I was in Africa, I couldn't find out where it was because my entry into America is a bill of sale. And that stops you from going any further. At some point in our history, I became
Nobody knows my name.
Baldwin's nigger.
James Baldwin, who are you?
Don't you care enough to find out?
So I didn't mean to play as much of that as I did, but I can't stop watching when I start. But that piece is called "A Person is More Important Than Anything Else," and that's from a statement that he makes in this documentary called "The Price of the Ticket." And I think we all have experienced being labeled in any number of ways, and sometimes we label ourselves before we want to be seen as a person. And I think it's important for all of us in every moment try to remember our individual humanity and the humanity of all others. And the major part of humanity is our unique perspectives. And as a photographer, you become very aware of that at an early age. And the reason I like to show some of my early work when I'm speaking at universities is because I see references in my early work to what I'm doing now. So this is one of the very first rolls of film I ever remember taking and when I was in high school in the early 90s. And I noticed that there was a frame within a frame. And when I look at a lot of the work that I was doing when I was in college, there was always a frame within a frame. And I was always interested as a photographer in the limits of the frame of the camera, but also trying to highlight that by actually framing something else within the space that I was documenting. That was a way for me to highlight the fact that this was a unique perspective, not a document, because we were often taught that photography is about the truth, but it really is about a very unique perspective, and at this time in black and white. And so at the time, I would start to go into the studio with my peers, and I'd give them a frame. I'd frame myself with them, or I'd frame them in a studio, and I'd try to make something else going on outside of the frame. And then I started to go out into the world, and I'd give people a frame, and I'd ask them to take a picture with that frame, and I'd take a picture of them taking a picture. And so it became like a collaboration, almost like a dance. And in a way, it was this way for me to be hyper aware of what I was looking at and what my own prejudice might be when I took a photograph, but also how chance plays into it in images like this one, or images like this one, which was a photograph of my mother holding the frame. And to make this picture make sense, I would say, so many things had to go right. The fact, like, I would have had to get up for breakfast, which would have been quite difficult at the time. But then I would have had to like bring my camera and my large 6x7 camera and my frames, and then meet my mother at this restaurant and think to give her a frame. And then in the 15th of a second that I took a photograph, someone walking down a busy street in New York City wearing a red hat just like hers looks into the frame of my into a dark restaurant into the frame of my camera. Like, there's so many levels of intersection that had to happen to make that moment happen that it's hard to derive any true meaning from it. And so that's where chance plays in. And I think in a way that's how the power of history, and that like there's a lot of people in this room today, and if anyone ever chooses to tell the story, it's probably going to be different than someone else's story. And I think that's important in every moment. And that's a lesson I learned from my mother. Her name is Deborah Willis. She's a photographer, photo historian, art historian, and we look a lot alike, in case you haven't noticed. And this is a piece that I did about kind of a symbiotic creative relationship called "Sometimes I See Myself in You," because I used to go places and people would say, "You're Deb's son," and she says now she goes places and she's Hank's mom. But a lot of the work that my mom does is about looking at images in popular culture and history, but also looking at relationships to African American history and culture. And that led me to do that with a lot of the images that I kind of am drawn to in society, like this image from American Apparel, and curious about its relationship to Africa, or this image from American Apparel, and curious about kind of where some of these images come from and how they come to make sense, and how they shape our notions of value, and what's really for sale in images like this. And I find a connection to images like this. Anybody know who this person was? What'd you say? Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes. Who's that? Cecil Rhodes. Anybody else? James Vanderson. What kind of thing? What would you guys expect this person to have done? He was one of the most famous person of his people of his generation. But when, what do you think this person would have done? Well, this is how he was known. And his name is I just left Bert Williams. And I'm thinking, and what I found so fascinating about this image of Bert Williams is that we might think of him, when you look at this person and the way they kind of authentically present blackness. Cecil Rhodes is very important. Like, now we're thinking about that. But I find it really interesting to think about how Bert Williams chose to represent authentic blackness when he was off stage, and how he was paid to do so by American popular culture, and how this performance of this notion of an identity can also be limiting, and thinking about kind of how things become almost a status quo, and thinking about how this was a status quo for most of my life, and this is the status quo probably for many other people's lives, and maybe it's going to go into new directions in just a few months, or maybe it'll go back. I'm really fascinating in looking at the past and the present and trying to draw connections. And so I started with my own work to start to think about looking at logos as hieroglyphs, and thinking about how I could draw connections between how certain bodies would have been treated at a certain period of time, and how I can embed meaning into these corporate logos that are so influential in my life and the life of almost everyone I know. And started thinking about the connection to the history of slavery, and how slaves were branded as a sign of ownership, and how so many of us all brand ourselves, whether it be through the cars we buy, the clothes we wear, the computer or phone we use. There is something about our identity that we attach to these things, and how we live in an age of branded consciousness. And I think about especially how African-American male bodies have often been used to sell commodities, and how the idea of ascension has been chained for so many people to ascending through sports and entertainment. And also how, again, some of these bodies might have been treated in different ways at different periods of time. And this is an image that's hanging in the museum. Now it's called Cotton Bowl from 2011, and Cotton Bowl. And I'm thinking a lot about college football, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and basketball, since it's March Madness, a multi-billion-dollar industry that's fueled off of the free labor of primarily descendants of slaves, and sharecroppers, because people are like, well, they're not slaves. Well, sharecropping was a very profitable industry for some people, but not usually the sharecroppers. I really wanted to make the comment about how on certain fields that are and were plantations are now football fields, and now there's similar kind of labor being played out on there to the benefit of very few. But also thinking about how I can talk about these issues of using advertising personally to talk about how even in mourning we're being marketed to. So this is a picture from my cousin's funeral, and I remember being in the funeral home and feeling useless as a photographer. And I like to say that this is the moment I feel like I became an artist, because it was the moment I realized that pictures couldn't say enough. And I needed to do more, say more. And I remember being in the funeral home, and there was like the $2,000 casket and the $5,000 casket and the $7,000 casket. And there's like this unspoken thing that, you couldn't afford to love them enough if you buy the $2,000 box of wood that's going to be thrown in the dirt, never to be seen again. And maybe, if you spend more, you love more. And there's like all of these different things that go into kind of validating who that person was and who you are. And I knew it was this impossible decision for me to watch my family members make, and either way it was going to have to go on a credit card. And curiously called Master. And so I wanted to start to comment on that, but thinking about how I could use the language of advertising to talk about things that advertising couldn't responsibly talk about, because advertising is such a powerful and ubiquitous language, meaning that we don't even have to speak a language or read it to be able to read the advertisement, because we've all been kind of trained to kind of make certain signifiers and make connections, and thinking about, in this one especially, how this piece and conversations about this piece helped me to realize my biggest problem. And my biggest problem is that race is not real. I know it, but it defines almost every moment of my life. And thinking about how 500 years ago in Africa, there were no black people, there were just people. And those people were of thousands of religions, thousands of cultures, spoke thousands of languages, and had thousands of worldviews. But many of them were millions of them were packaged into ships, told they were all the same, and sent halfway across the world. And I'm not surprised that 500 years later, so many people are still trying to figure out who we are, because there's this absolute power when you take actual hybridity, as diverse as the people in this room, and lump them into one group and then take away all of these incredible virtues that each individual has. So I think race is the most successful advertising campaign of all time. I've continued to use advertising as a medium, but then I started to look at actual ads, because truth is better than fiction, many say, and start to think about, well, what's going on in an ad like this? This is an actual ad from 2005 or 6. Anybody want to guess or comment about what this is an ad for? A contraceptive. Sneakers. Reebok. I want to hear about the contraceptive one. It says Plan B. That's interesting about context. And some people said they saw a Reebok ad. But how does it say Reebok anywhere? Where? Where does it say REEBOK? The fact that many of us can look at this and see it as, well, what's for sale on this ad? How about that? An image, what'd you say? Authenticity. Anybody else? Freedom. Clout. Grit. Being comfortable with who you are. So I think these are all very astute readings. Some people might think it's an ad for a shoe product. But really, I realize that ads aren't really about the product. It's about what ideas we can get to attach to them. And this is the person on the left is maybe recognizable as a musical performer, entrepreneur. His name is 50 Cent. What I found fascinating about this ad is that he's not wearing Reebok clothes, he's actually wearing his own brand. But he's also saying that, like, I am who I am, and I guess he's suggesting that at the end of the day, or the ad suggests at the end of the day, he's just a criminal. And I personally felt that might be limiting for certain people who saw this image, although there might be a lot of other positive, empowering things. I think that we tend to see people who quote unquote look like us in an ad and then feel like it's about us. And I was curious what other images were being created at the time, and so I went online and saw what other images were up. And so this one is of Andy Ruddock, and he's a champion. This is of Lucy Liu, and she's like a little girl. And Yao Ming is a monkey on a basketball. And Allen Iverson's the devil. And then Jay-Z said, I got my MBA at Marcy Projects. And I guess he's got the rubber bands, which he's referencing him being his experience as a drug dealer. And I was curious because I realized that African American men are 5% of the population. So that's a pretty small number considering the fact. But in the first iteration of these ads, they're represented 3 times. And the one African American man, at the end of the day, is a criminal. The one white man is a champion, though he feels bad about it, which is like the white man's burden. Women who are 50% of the population are only represented 1 time. And there's Lucy Liu is supposed to both be like, she's supposed to be like, she's of color, but not too much, and like speak to all these things. But then there's also this kind of, she also ultimately is this docile, innocent little girl. And then the Yao Ming is like this Chinese giant that we don't know what to do with. And they're like, let's put a monkey on a basketball with a yin yang symbol and the rising sun, even though that's Japan. And then we have like there's all of this stuff. And then the other black guy is the devil, and the other one is a drug dealer. And I realized, like many of you guys realize, that it's not really about the product, it's about the image and what images we can attach, what ideas we can attach to the image through the branding. And so I started looking at other ads, like this one from a 2001 Toyota RAV4, and someone gave it to me, and I didn't know what to do with it for a long time. And then after a long time of looking at it, all I could think to do was this. And I realized that the last thing that I would think this was an ad for was Japanese cars. And so I really started to think about how, what is for sale and what happens when you remove the branding from it. You start to see kind of what's actually for sale, which is an image and this idea. And it shapes our notions of who we are and who others are. And looking at ads like this one from 1969, does anyone want to guess what this is for? You're Correct. It said slack power, anti-establishment, post-grad slacks by his. And in fine print it says, our post-grad slacks have soul with a mighty medley of plaids, stripes, and solids. But I realized that as early as 1969, Madison Avenue had been figured out how to appropriate the language of the Black Power movement to sell what looked like golf pants to me, to the educated revolutionary. And thinking about how the majority of people making ads for African American people to like identify with were white men on Madison Avenue who rarely had opportunities to relate to them on a one-to-one level. And I'm thinking about how these images help shape African American identity. So I started a project called Unbranded Reflections in Black by Popular Culture from 1968 to 2008. And I took two ads for every year during that period and removed all the advertising information to look at what's really being sold. And so anyone want to guess what this is an ad for? Yeah, margarine, somebody said it. Bluebonnet. But almost all of us, when we look at it originally, we see this picture of Joe Frazier, heavyweight boxing champion, Thriller Manila. And when it's unbranded, you see this kind of almost direct relationship to Aunt Jemima or Hattie McDaniel or the slave Mammy caricature, and thinking of taking one of the few symbols of black masculinity or strength of the time and kind of anyway conflating it with this servitude. It's definitely questionable or curious. But what I love about looking at ads is that no one person could be held responsible for them, that like we as a society are the creators of it, because the ads are essentially a reflection of a society's hopes and dream at a given period of time. And so this is one that I found in Ebony magazine in 2005. Anyone care to guess what this is for? The dishes? Well, it's actually an ad for kitty litter. And you might ask yourself, how did it find its place in Ebony magazine? And there's this stereotype about black people liking watermelon. And I can almost imagine people in the boardroom being like, how do we get black people to buy our kitty litter? Well, black people like watermelon. And what would make watermelon more civilized, but if all the seeds were in one place, you could just scoop them away, just like our kitty litter. Like that's kind of like the same logic for the gold teeth one. And it's kind of amazing how complicated and nuanced it's gotten, but also looking at ads as a sign of the time. Like this is an ad from 1977 that literally couldn't have existed in 1967, where you have a white man and a black man sitting at the same lunch counter, which is the first message, but the white man's looking longingly at his dark meat, which is like a result of the Black Power movement and the blaxploitation movement movies. Or this one where this woman is sitting in front of a fan, and like the best way to enjoy a cigarette is to let the smoke just blow back into your face because cigarettes are so refreshing. Or this one from 1979, where I say these people just happen to be black, so it's not really about race, it's about class in a sense, but where race isn't a factor, you see gender fall into play, and so the men play, but the women watch, and you can they used to look at the woman on the left feeding this guy this burger, but if you look at his right hand, he's got a burger down there, so you can almost imagine the photographer being like, oh, you need something to do, feed him. And so in each of these, I could talk about each of them forever, but I am also interested in what happens when history and culture becomes corporatized. In this ad for Chevy, which is Heartbeat of America, it was a Black History Month ad, and it said, once upon a time in America, there were people who were proud and strong and celebrated. And I was looking at it, and I was like, this is kind of like a really nice timeline of African American history. You have the African chief or griot, and then you have the soldier and the jazz musician and the civil rights activist and the college student. And I was like, wait a minute, somebody's missing in this timeline, because you couldn't really sell the Heartbeat of America with a picture of a beat up bloody slave in the middle of it. And so like in the corporate representation of American history, black people came here like everybody else. We had our own authentic culture, and then like we fought for our country and over time got accepted. And it's like, that's a Black History Month ad for a car. And so I first presented that series at the Rubel Family Collection in Miami as a first series, and it was really powerful for me to actually see the work in that format, in this timeline, and realize how it could be a timeline of American history. And I started thinking about other points in American history and how, as I looked through it, I saw prior to the 60s, almost all the images of African Americans you saw in ads were as caricatures and as servants. But then, and so this was an ad from like 1907 for Jell-O, or this is for cream of wheat. But then I was thinking about what was happening 100 years ago in our country. And 100 years ago, no women in the country had the right to vote. Very few African American men were empowered to vote. And so it's safe to say that the overwhelming majority of the population in this democracy, when America was great, didn't have an opportunity to vote. And what was happening was there was this huge fear that if women got the right to vote, they would do it first by any means necessary. And the images to discourage women to vote were often as brutal as of the images of African Americans who were also asking for opportunity. And often they say like women and children first, which can often be read as white women and children first. But in a society where like womanhood, and we think about the Birth of a Nation, which was a film that was out at this time about preserving white chastity and virtue, white female chastity and virtue, and you see the images that were being made to like actually undermine that, you start to realize the complexity of these values. And like how this is what happens when women have the right to vote. They're going to do to men what men do to women. And this is going to be your fate if you allow your wife to vote. And so I really started to question how advertising affects our notions of our society then and now, and how race plays into it then and now. And so I started this project called Unbranded, A Century of White Women, and where I wanted to really think about the construction of, because blackness is interesting, but whiteness is amazing. Because if you think about it, 100 years ago, most people we call white today would not have been white. Like Italian people, German people, Russian people, Jewish people, Polish people. Help me out here. White people, Irish people. And so whiteness is this thing that people can move into. And it's not like we talk about it like it's this fixed thing. And I've had black people, white people, come up to me and tell me that they're black. And I'm like, of course you are. Because and like this whole idea of blackness, like there is this weird kind of imaginary line that ignores the fact that most people in the world are Asian, and they range in complexion from as dark as I am to the lightest person in the room. And I really wanted to kind of start to deconstruct that by looking at this construction of a white female identity at a time when whiteness was still taking shape, but also when women were still fighting to get equal opportunity or opportunity, which they're still fighting for. But how do ads play into that? Like ads like this one from 1919, which, anyone want to guess what this is an ad for? 1919, so it's right after the war. It's obviously an ad for hosiery, because the best thing that a woman could do is inspire her shell-shocked man to get better through looking good. And I'm really fascinated with like how these things are positioned, where African Americans were often placed in ads like this one, which is an ad for the starch. And so I guess her job was to be, as a woman of the house, was to kind of make sure that the other woman could do her job. But I'm also interested, I start to see kind of how these, if I was coming as a second-class citizen from another part of the world to the United States, fortunately for me, there was already a built-in second-class citizenry, and that would, I could join them, or I could, learn to become a part of, the righteous society, which is through assimilating and buying into things like the standards of beauty, and like this image for an eye cream, which was called Wellsworth Products for Better Eyesight. And the idea is like, if you use this eye cream, you'll get rid of your crow's feet and you'll have better eyesight. Or this ad from 1932 after the stock market crashes. Anybody want to guess what this is an ad for? You can't guess. It's an ad for floor polish. And she's saying like, I'm beginning to look like an old scrub woman. And the whole thing is about how, like, basically we've heard your cry and we recognize that you're losing your beauty, so we create a beauty treatment for you, which is Johnson's Floor Wax. And the way the emotion about kind of, if people think you work, they won't actually respect you and treat you well, it starts to play into this. And then there's also this ongoing fantasy of these kind of buffoonish black people who are happy to serve you. Golly, Miss Maria, folks just can't help having a friendly feeling for this here coffee. And the way in which this whiteness is always created in contrast to this blackness is interesting in the timeline, but also in any other form of otherness where this Pacific Islanders and this Gauguin-inspired Dole pineapple juice ad play out. And over time, things change. And what's really fascinating, I can't talk about it in depth like I really want to, but it is amazing to see how the roles shift. So we see at one point the women aren't supposed to do anything, and then at some point when war happens, the women take the place of the man in many ways, or in this case, she's protecting him in this refrigerator ad. Or the anxiety of the war starts to take place in ads like this. Anyone want to guess what this is an ad for? I always ask that question. It's just a rhetorical question. And hopefully you'll look at all ads and start to really think about what's going on, because it says women and carrots have one enemy in common. That enemy is dryness. So this is an ad for a refrigerator with an ice box. Some of us might read something else into it. So there is this kind of way in which this creation of this demographic is kind of narrow what the values are. But what happens is, like, by the 40s, when the men are off to war, women are having to do the man's job. And the same women who were like worried about their hands looking like they do work are like looking at the camera and like being very proud of their work they're doing. And the men are even cheering them in 1945 until, of course, they want their jobs back and they want the women to take their jobs back. And so you start to see the way that advertising frequently like puts people right back into it. It manipulates all of the ways in which we kind of negotiate our role in society. And especially fascinating to me are kind of ways in which easy signifiers about femininity, but also about race play in like ads like this one from 1949 for Budweiser, because hospitality is quickly recognized. And so back in the day, I guess you'd have your slave offer somebody some ham, and now you just offer somebody a Bud. Like so the logic is skewed, to say the least. But also you start to see progress where you see these women, now she's freed from the refrigerator, which was once kind of what her whole life was about, but then she's all caught up in a poor system at work. She dreams that she won an election with her Maidenform bra on. I don't know, she has a curious relationship to her lipstick. But as more and more women start to get out of the house, you start to see new things, new challenges. You start to see them being objectified in different ways. And this was an ad for Hanes, and it said, "No seams to worry about." Or this one, does anyone want to guess what this is for? It is for a girdle, and it said, "Come out of the Bone Age, darling." And this was created in 1955, the same year that Emmett Till was murdered for allegedly whistling at a white woman. But this one shows a caveman, but more importantly, a white caveman dragging her by her hair into modernity, because girdles used to be made with whale bone, and now you can use synthetic material. This is one of the ones that kind of hurt me the most in watching it, because I realized how insidious it was. Because these were nightmares taking place in like household magazines. So these are people in the safety of their homes reading these things, but also being like sent subliminal messages. This one is really powerful. It was, anybody want to guess what it's an ad for? The sweaters, maybe? It says in the ad, "Men are better than women. Indoors, women are useful, even pleasant. On a mountain, there's something of a drag, so don't go hauling her upside the side of a mountain to show off your Drummond climbing sweaters." And this is what happens when anyone asks for equal opportunity. People are afraid they're going to lose their equal opportunity. And this ad shows these two men, they're like on the side of a cliff trying to decide, should we like casually, she wants to be on the equal playing field with her, should we like let her go or let her fend for herself? And like that is a really kind of, and so like, I do think the same violence that was being played out on African Americans during that civil rights movement was being played out psychologically on housewives in middle-class white, quote-unquote, homes. And I say white because I don't believe in it, but it's an American short-term shorthand. But then the violence gets crazier and crazier and crazier in the 60s. But then life in the kitchen gets easier. But then life gets crazier and crazier and crazier in this ad for pants. And then finally, 1968, which seems to be a watershed year for so many people and so many things. You see, like, the women kind of maybe fighting back, but then, you know, things kind of maintain. And so what happens as we move into the 70s is we start to see new images take place that make new suggestions. By 84, we see she's off. This is the nightmare that they were worried about in 1915. But then it's taken place, and then 91, we start to see the Clintons on the scene, and that takes a place. And I'm just going to shift through them a lot because I have more to talk about. But images like this one from 1999 are still shocking to me because this is how you sold, I guess, jeans. Does anybody else find that astounding that we would still be needing to make other people feel less in order for us to feel more? How do we, and what are we buying into when we buy these products? Are we also buying into the ideas that are attached to them? But also, what are we doing? Also, there are moments like this one where this is an ad for women's product that literally could not have existed 10 years before. You couldn't have sold sneakers to women in this way. And so there's a new kind of conversation that's taking place, and new women are kind of coming on the scene, and the images of how some women are relating to other women and men are changing. But then, of course, there are images like this that are keeping America moving forward. So that's a shorthand of that series, which is to me like a history book in itself. I think you could learn as much about a culture by looking at the ads than you could by reading a whole book. But also, I'm constantly thinking about how those ads are a part of me and are part of my own identity as an American man, and how I was conditioned to relate and see women. But I also think about myself as a hybrid of many other things. And artists like Sanford Biggers deal with a hybridity, and this is him. I asked him to pose for a photograph in this suit, and I made a work where when you're standing in front of it, it's blurry, but when you stand from the side, it becomes clear. And almost all my work dating back to high school is about framing and context, and how, depending on where you stand, it affects what you see, whether it be about an identity model or whether it be about the truth. This idea of an African-American identity is something that I've always struggled with, so I created this Africa America, a place to call home, piece, so I could point to this place that I come from, which exists primarily in my head. But also in work like these lenticulars where it says it could have been you, it should have been me, I think you'll notice that I'm constantly trying to challenge myself to find new ways to encourage myself and viewers to reconsider a situation. It says it's all your fault, and then it changes to it's not my fault. And how these kind of things flip and flex takes place in work like this called, which is a photograph by Ernest Withers in the Memphis Sanitation Workers March in 1968. I found it crazy when I saw this image first, that it was necessary for people to stand collectively and affirm their identity by saying, I am a man, because the phrase I grew up with wasn't I am a man, it's I am the man. And I was curious how it went from this kind of collective statement during segregation to this somewhat selfish-seeming statement during integration. And also the power of I am. And so I remixed it in this series of paintings where it says, I'm the man, who's the man, you the man, what a man. I am man, I am human, I am many, I am I am a man. Because I realized that rather than validating myself on anyone else's standard of what's important, the greatest gift that any of us is given is our consciousness. And the fact that we can say I am means that we can do. And thinking about people who've said I am, like Jesse Jackson and his I am somebody, and the corniness of pins, but also how again this statement of I am can transcend, and like, who's the greatest? Who's the greatest? I find it astounding that someone born in the segregated South of very little means at a very young age, your age, many of you, said, "I am the greatest," and then set about making the rest of the world recognize that he's the greatest. Like, he didn't say, "I'm the greatest boxer of all time." He said, "I am the greatest." And that is such an incredible statement that says something about the power of I am. So in this piece, I started to make these larger-than-life speech bubbles, and political pins, and like we stand in front of them and deal with them almost as sculptures. But also, I feel like when you call anything art, all of a sudden gives us a new license to look at it and read it a different way. And I love this idea of flipping the script and the focus of things, and the power of protest. Of wearing something on your chest or putting your body out there is something that I'm also really fascinated with like images of this woman, Amelia Boynton, who was in Selma, Alabama, protesting in her 50s. She just died last year at 109 years old, but was beaten by the police for trying to register to vote. Or images like this from that same year of little boys being arrested by the police during the Watts riots, and wanting to have, I made them in mirrors and ask viewers to put themselves in relationship to these moments. And so I started as a photographer and photo artist, looking at sculptures and images from the past. I started looking at images from the past to make sculptures like this, and sculptures that force us as viewers to like walk up to and around these images and these moments, and really inspire myself to really ponder them. It's almost like walking into a historic moment, thinking about the potency of someone putting their arm through a police vehicle where you don't know who's on the other side, if they're going to break your arm, or if anyone will see it. What is the power of just making the smallest gesture can do and say so much. So I started to pay homage to these people in sculptures that highlight elements of these moments. I started to think about this collective idea of protest and movement towards things that we believe in. How would I ask myself and viewers to not just think about that history as part of the past, but a part of the present? So in images like this one from 1967, and Ernest Cole, a black South African photographer, took this picture of miners being strip searched, which is kind of crazy to think that you have to be strip searched to go and leave work. But I always felt guilty looking at this image because I found myself gawking at their butts. And I felt like if I am representing this image, am I like recreating this problem? And so I thought maybe when I remade it, I would crop it at the shoulders, and I titled it Raise Up, and to give it a new meaning. And then just 6 months after I created, the events in Ferguson, Missouri happened, which gave this sculpture a new meaning. And I was really fascinated with how something that happened 50 years ago, somewhere very far away, could speak to the present, could actually speak to the future through a slight shifting of the context. And I think about that in images like this, about things that should have never happened, should never happen again, and they continue to happen, and how looking at them through sculptures of these little kids' hands, bronze hands on barbed wire, they reference so many things that are happening all over the world, but also the power of people collectively crossing bridges and breaking down walls and barriers in Germany in 1989, making sculptures of these kind of inconceivable moments where you as viewers are asked to walk around it. But then I started to think about sports as a metaphor for transcendence, and how in so many major successes, especially for African American people, the first steps were made through athletes. And now we don't want athletes to be political. And it's kind of amazing because they probably wouldn't, literally, Jackie Robinson, they wouldn't have been able to do what they did if it weren't political. And so I started to think about how I can talk about sports in that same way, and I was able to make sculptures to put them out into the public. This one's called Liberty, and I love this idea of that taking place. I have 2 more projects to show you. Do you want to see both or one or the other? Okay. So thinking about how we all have multiple identities within us, it can't be, I like to say you can't tell what color I am by looking at my skin. that there's a rainbow that exists within each of us, and that rainbow can be exhibited, but just by the clothes we in our closet that we choose to wear. And so one of my collaborators, Bayate Ross Smith, has done that in his own work. And one of the things that we've realized is that for some people, this idea of who we are is almost always predicated on our skin tone, and that can have very negative effects on the way on our survival, literally. And so we started a project called Question Bridge Black Males, where we wanted to show that there's as much diversity within any demographic as there is outside of it. And we did this by asking African American men to ask and answer each other's questions. Here's a trailer from that.
Black man,
Do you want to get out of the situation that you're in?
What is the reluctance for taking responsibility for improving our communities?
are your children better or worse off as a result of your involvement?
Why wouldn't you be happy with your son being gay?
Why are you so violent?
Why do you have that take mentality?
Why are you afraid of being intelligent?
Why?
Why?
What I want to know is why.
I believe that we've incorporated a lot of things that are unhealthy to us.
We are supposed to be tough,
I can't let them see no type of sucker.
along with various other stereotypes.
The level of mentorship in our community is not as strong as it possibly could be.
When I came up, crack was a quick way for a black man to make $1 million.
Sometimes I think because we think we're black, we're some other kind of human beings, but we're just like most other human beings.
Why didn't y'all leave us the blueprint?
We did leave you a blueprint.
We just didn't tell you where it was.
That's something that we dropped the ball on.
What do you fear?
That something will harm my children.
I fear success. Am I the only one who has problem eating chicken, watermelon, and bananas in front of white people?
Hold on, bro. Y'all niggas crazy.
That word, we have to stop using it.
I think black people can say nigga anytime they want.
How dare you? What right do you have to use this word?
A lot of nigga questions for the rapper.
What is common to all of us that we can say makes us who we are?
This is the easiest question in the world to answer.
The thing that we have in common is that we are male and we are black.
All right, my question is, I try to live good, but I'm surrounded by bad. And I want to know what it is I could do to do better and live peaceful, surrounded by all evil. How can I do that?
That's a lot. And that's just so for me, they say like the black vote, as if like 40 million people are going to vote the same way because of one issue, or the female vote. Like literally 150 or 60 million people are going to vote off of one issue? I don't think that's true. And I think that all of us have many things that come together to create our identity. And I was able to show this work at the Zora Neale Hurston Museum in Eatonville, which was really a powerful opportunity to show it here. But what we did is we went around the country, my collaborators, Bayate Ross Smith, Chris Johnson, and Kamal Sinclair, and like asked people to ask and answer each other's question. And it was amazing each time, coming with my own prejudices about age and ethnicity or class, about thinking about what people would say or what they were questions they would ask, what answers they would give, and seeing the diversity of it, but then being able to present it in this 5-channel video installation, which is almost like a stream of consciousness conversation, and recognizing the importance of not judging, as hard as it is. Questions like this.
I wonder, black man, are you really ready for freedom? And if not, what will it take for you to want and need this freedom?
Can bring about answers like this.
Am I ready for freedom? And what would it take for me to want that freedom? First, I would have to stop and ask myself, and that's a tough question. Because freedom to me is a mind state, because you got some people that's not in jail, that's not free. You got people that's in prison in dysfunctional relationships. You got people that's in prison with jobs, they work 9 to 5 that they don't like. Some people are in prison with alcohol and drug abuse. So I would have to really ask myself what's in prison in me. And what's been in prison in me is my self-esteem, my lack of self-esteem. My lack of self-esteem has led me to commit crime, to hurt people, to manipulate people, right? Because if I love myself, there's no way I could walk outside this room and punch somebody if I'm esteemed within myself. So to be free to me would have to be, I would have to change, you know? So in order for me to grow, I'd have to change, because if change is necessary for growth, in order for me to grow, I would have to adapt the mentality that something has got to change in me. I have to change my mind state. I would have to change the way I talk. I have to change the people I interact with. That would be free.
This is a man sitting in San Francisco County Jail. 3 seconds after seeing that question, that was his immediate response. And I would have never thought that someone in that condition could ever be as thoughtful and clear and nuanced about their position on anything. And I feel like we have millions of people who have that level of complexity, intellect, articulateness. Because one of them said this word, I was like, that's not a real word. And I looked it up, I was like, that's a real word. That was the beauty of it, in recognizing that there's I can learn from everyone, and we can learn from everyone. And so we created this website, and we published a book which is outside for anyone who wants to see the range of that conversation. And then the last project I want to talk to you about is The Truth, which is an ongoing project which is called In Search of the Truth, where I made a kind of modern day confession booth where people go into it. There's a touch screen and says everyone has their version of the truth. What's yours? Speak for the next 2 minutes, starting with the truth is. We took it to Ireland, which has a great kind of tradition of people giving confessions. It was this kind of amazing experience to just see what some people had to say.
The truth is not to be discovered because it was there before we were born. It hid itself when we were born, and it only comes out again once we are dead. I'm nearly dead, so the truth will shortly emerge.
I believe that the truth is the struggle to find what it really is.
The truth is really small. It's very hard to see, but if you look really, really close, you will find the truth, and it's all around. Thank you.
It is true that I have got a girlfriend that is named Rian, and it is true that my favorite animal is a dolphin, okay? And that's all I wanted to say.
The truth is, Molly, you're a bitch.
The truth is that I want to be an actor, a dancer, a singer, but I'm not sure how to get into the business. I've joined Trading Faces, and well, I've joined the agency of there, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get into I am in the agency, but I'm not sure if I'm going to get anything out of it. And I just really want to be an actress especially, or maybe a beautician, or a singer maybe, or maybe a dancer, but I'm not sure how to get in. That's the truth. This was an Excellent Clean production. I want to say hello to Melody, because she's my little doggy, and all my other pets, and my parents. Peace out.
The truth, I believe, is Lego. Lego brings you think small, but believe big. Lego is in all our minds. So the truth is very, very small, but think big. This is very cute. Thank you.
See, that little 12-year-old just blew my mind. And literally just by creating a platform for other people to share their wisdom is so amazing. And we were able to take it to Afghanistan. We were able to take it all over to the United States. And we're currently raising money to travel to all 50 states ahead of the next presidential election. We do have it currently up at times in New York. And this is one of the most powerful truths that I have experienced.
The truth is, I've tried to end my life 5 times, and every time I don't succeed, I feel better about myself, and I've overcome it, and I don't wish I was dead anymore, and that's the truth. And I'm happy that I'm a bigger person now.
And that's about the generosity of strangers. Like, she doesn't know that we're looking at her. And she doesn't know that we can't see her face. She just went in there and recorded herself and didn't adjust the seat, but also poured her heart out. And they're now my collaborators, even though I don't know their names, and I likely will never see any of them again. And they've left an indelible mark on my heart and my life, and it's also about their uniqueness. And so ultimately, all of my work is really trying to create this platform for engagement, and the truth is a great opportunity for that. And so part of that installation is having these signs that say in various languages, but also in English, the truth is I reflect you, I accept you, I hear you. This is it in Vietnamese. And on the other side, it shows you how to say it in English, and then a placard that teaches you how to say that phrase. And I believe if we could learn how to say one thing in someone else's language, even though we said it poorly, we might really bridge a gap. And then we should always not be afraid to inhabit our statements. So we made these sculptures that people get to sit in and be a part of the truth, and even a tree. So that's about it. But thank you guys all for coming and staying, and thanks. Do we have time for questions? Does anyone have a question? We have microphones if you do. I tried to answer them all, but.
Hi. I follow you on Instagram, and I saw you post about your super PAC like 2 weeks ago when you started it. You didn't talk about it in your talk, so I was just hoping if you could talk about it and what your goals are for it over the next, election year.
What are your goals for the next election year? I don't know. I kind of talked myself. My friend Eric Gottesman and I talked ourselves into a corner. But really, it's a result of realizing that there's so many opportunities for the public to use their voices and that aren't really used, and that we as artists can facilitate that. So the Truth Booth Tour is a part of this idea of getting the public's voices to be heard. But then I don't know if I have it in here. I do not. It's so funny. But yeah, so Eric and I started this super PAC is what the question was, and it's called For Freedoms. And the idea is that inspired by Franklin Roosevelt in 1941, his State of the Union said that every person is entitled to 4 basic freedoms: freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. And what I found amazing when I thought about that, when I later did research, and Norman Rockwell made a series of paintings for war bonds, so it says ours to fight for, was that, at that time, freedom of speech meant that you had the right to join a union. Freedom of worship meant that you could be Protestant or you could be Catholic. Freedom from want is just an absurd and crazy American idea, which maybe is a good thing, but meant that you could have everything, so to speak. And then freedom from fear is that meant, based off of this image, that as a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant family, you could tuck your kids into bed safely without having anything to worry about. But if you were a Japanese American family, tough luck. But really, I realized that there was a lot of hypocrisy in that moment. But really, I was curious about what the 4 freedoms might look like today. And so my friend Eric and I started this PAC, which is super PACs are these ways for people to make political ads. They're like a political advertising agency, and they're really problematic because part of freedom of speech has gone so far that money is seen as speech. And since you can't limit speech, you can't limit about the money that you can give somebody to say whatever you want. Not the truth per se, but whatever you want. And that's really complicated our political landscape. And so I was really curious about what those 4 freedoms would look like today, thinking about how if you believe in freedom of speech, you have to defend the right of the Ku Klux Klan to speak against your existence. Or what does freedom of religion look like when we have dozens, if not hundreds, of different religious values? How do we make space for all of these different freedoms, or how do we think about same-sex, multigender families in this freedom from fear of being separated, or if you have an undocumented family member, really thinking about kind of what Thanksgiving looks like at my table, my family's table. So all of these kind of, what do they look like in the 21st century? And so the agenda behind the PAC is to mobilize the creative community, not just myself, but get other artists to make work that's really of our time and about the issues of our time, and then more importantly, to put them out into the world as actual ads, and hopefully have an impact that ads have, which are insidious and long-lasting. So that's the long answer for that. Is there one other question in the far back?
Yeah, I'm sorry if you already answered this. I was a little late, but
yeah, I did.
Okay, cool, fantastic. Here you go. No, so you said that whiteness is something that you can come into, you can adopt yourself. Is blackness something that you then catch, or are you born into blackness, or is that also something you can adapt to?
I mean, I would say, if you look at Iggy Azalea, some people might say, do they want her is another question. But I think the thing about race is it's always been this, like the binary idea of race is absurd, and the fact that you can go to Sweden and they have Nordic versions of black people, or you can go to Senegal and you have versions of, everyone has their other. And I'm saying that like black and white are very easy terms to say, but almost all of us are gray. You know, people have been having sex for like 70 million years or something, a long time. And like stuff happens. So it depends, like when you talk about racial purity, it's like how far do you want to go back, you know? And where are your records? Does any, I'd like to have one question from a woman per se, since I showed a lot of work. Wait, our beautiful microphone.
So I'm obligated to share this. It's 200,000 years with the Homo sapiens.
So
anthropology department, sorry. So
I don't believe that.
But so the question is, for the I Am What I Am series, what kinds of commentary do you have on the overlap with the biblical I am that I am, and the notion of I am as another calling of God, right? And so then we have this radical co-optation of the spirit in the service of commodification.
Do I really need to say anything else? I think can you say that one more time? Seriously, can you give her back the microphone? Just because I'm not, just say it. This is about listening, please. Did she say it a little too fast for everybody to hear her? No, you got it. You want to repeat it? I'm serious. I just want to hear it one more time, por favor.
Wonderful.
Just the I am that I am part.
So this is called the law of karma in effect right now, because I do this to my students all the time.
Thank you.
Would you say that one more time? Right, okay. So it's, the biblical is I am that I am, and I am is a calling of God, right? Because it's G-D. We don't actually claim the name of God. And so seeing this I am what I am is it's a commodification not only of the body but of the spirit. I am as a holy being, I am that I am.
Thank you. So thank you all for coming, and hopefully I'll get to see you again. I'll sign some books out there.